Hi, welcome in.
Hey, how are you?
I am great. How are you tonight?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me, and hello, Transgender Show and Transverse.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to come on and share your story. It helps a lot of people, and we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So, first off, for the record, how do you identify? What are your preferred pronouns?
So, my preferred pronouns are she, her, and I identify as intersex and trans, and a lesbian, like you mentioned. But I do take the identity of intersex along with trans.
And then the fun one I like to start with here, how did you choose your name?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's more backstory to my middle name and why I chose that, but I had like three or four names that I just really liked, that I just have always liked. And when you're sort of transitioning, you like try to make sure you don't know people with that name, so it's not like awkward if you like have a bunch of people in your social circle that have the same name as you. So I had several names, but Lindsay was always at the top of my list, and my wife also liked it, so it was a done deal.
Yeah, once you get the vote of approval from her, then you're set. So, as you stated in your bio, you were born phenotypically male, but with the XX chromosomes. So, and you've mentioned being intersex. Can you describe for people out there that aren't familiar with what being intersex means and maybe that term phenotypically male, so that we can all be on board with what that means entirely?
Absolutely. So the term intersex is a very like broad term. It's an umbrella term that describes medical conditions that are not like associated with a typical like binary sex. So it can
Hmm.
be differences in genitalia, reproductive organs, or in my case, chromosome abnormalities. Um, and what it means when it says phenotypically male is that for the first almost 30 years of my life, I appeared to be, by all accounts, a pretty typical male and was assigned male at birth.
Hmm.
But internally, it was a different story. I have a lot of other things going on inside, and biologically speaking, my chromosome uh, abnormality aligns with that of a woman.
Now, a piece of information that I came across, I also said in your bio that you have two wonderful kids. A piece of information I came across said that I can't remember. I believe it said that intersex people, that XX chromosome people, are sterile. Is misinformation like that common, and does it affect how you're able to basically affect how people perceive you and how you're able to kind of describe yourself?
I think a little bit. I mean, I think the hardest part in the intersex community is that it is such a wide term and it describes so many different conditions and some of these conditions are incredibly rare. My condition, I think, kind of falls in the middle. It's more rare, but it's not like one of the more ultra rare conditions you might see. And because of that, some people don't want to talk about it, right? It's just kind of like the identity of when you're a trans person. Sometimes there's shame that goes with it. Sometimes people just don't want to have to discuss it in public with anyone. Um, and there's a lack of research in the field for sure. There's a lack of, um, I would say, reliable information out there. There's some good organizations that are right now trying to work against that and put out good information. And hopefully in the
Hmm.
future, there'll be uh, more reliable information that paints a better picture of the community.
Has being genetically female helped in any way in your description of yourself to cis people or in their adoption and acceptance?
So I would say for the most part it has not. Um, I think probably a lot of people watching the show and all of us in the trans community can relate to how complicated it can be to try to explain. um, what being transgender means to a cisgender individual, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there's a learning curve there, and they don't get it, or they're confused sort of by the terminology or what that means. Um, and then when you throw on the term intersex, it's kind of like you just dig an even deeper hole,
Huh.
and you almost have to take it like one thing at a time. Like one of my coworkers, I ended up telling about this, and I was sort of explaining all of it at one time. He stopped and he was like, "What are chromosomes?" And I'm like, "This is going to be a long conversation. Let me get my notebook out." And
Let's get out the charts and
so,
graphs and we'll dive into
yeah,
that.
yeah. So I think while it's an interesting footnote, I usually use my trans identity first
Hmm.
when I am trying to explain to somebody sort of like my experiences. And then I do like to make mention of the intersex identity, just mainly to raise awareness for the community.
Hmm.
It's one of those things that, it's not a true like identity because it's referring to assigned sex, but some people do take that identity to just raise awareness and give more information about what it means to be intersex.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring that up. I find it super interesting, that fact that, I mean, I would think that a lot of people would find it easier to understand or accept because you've got the XX chromosome. So yes, you are female. It's just there was something happened and your external shell developed a certain way, but your body was, is female. So it seems like it would be easier for people to understand and accept. It's just kind of weird that intersex term itself, just like you said, digs you into a deeper hole that makes it harder for people to understand.
Yeah, I think too when you have a population that might want to see the world in black and white, that anything that sort of like deviates from that is just going to confuse them, whether that's being trans or intersex. I think there's a lot of similarities there, to where people just don't want to try to understand something that either challenges their worldview or they don't quite understand.
Mhm. So, when did you realize that you had this condition? I mentioned in the bio that it was later in life. What was it that brought about that awareness and that unveiling that?
Yeah, so it was around 6 or 7 years ago now, and I had struggled with
Oh, gosh.
kind of your typical um, gender dysphoria for your whole life, with different issues that had presented itself throughout childhood, teen years, that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
I had some other health issues that were presenting itself, and they were having a hard time identifying some things that were going on with my blood work. There was a lot of blood work issues that was coming up where levels were out of whack, and they
Hmm.
couldn't explain why. And um, sort of one of those things where they just keep sending you for more and more tests and more and more tests. And eventually, someone ordered a chromosomal karyotype to get down to sort of the nuts and bolts and see if there's something there. And sure enough, there was. And there was this abnormality there. And that was when I was officially diagnosed.
Hmm. And with that diagnosis, what did that bring about? Was that a relief, or was it primarily just kind of a shock, or was it probably somewhere in between?
Yeah, it was probably somewhere in between. You know, in the one hand, it's like there was like a lot of anger that I went through at that time. I was still actively rebelling against like I'm not going to be able to transition. I'm not going to be able to do this socially. I'm not going to be able to do this from my family perspective. And there was a lot of anger about like all these sort of like times I told myself, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you just kind of get hit upside the head with literally like a test. And it's like, no, you're right. Like there's a reason that all these things have been happening for you, at least individually. And it just kind of was frustrating, because, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but I was raised in a very conservative home, and that was hard for me because there was not an area I could talk about stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. How long did it take you to accept it fully, accept this part of you, and take it on as an identity that you then kind of stood behind and said, okay, we're going to do this?
I would say that I had sort of like minor acceptance, I would say about 5 years ago, where it's like I knew it was there and I knew this was sort of who I was, but I wasn't like committed to doing anything about it at that point. It was
Hmm.
kind of like, well, let me just see if I can fight through it and everything else. And I officially started my transition between 3 and 4 years ago. So it was in, it's been several years now when I fully said, okay, if I don't do something, this is not going to end well. And I just need to move forward. I need to take those steps to move forward.
Hmm. How did it manifest itself for you, before you had this information? Were you doing things like cross-dressing? Were there other things that were signs up until this point?
I'd say there was some pretty, looking back, pretty obvious signs. I was definitely cross-dressing pretty regularly throughout, my life, even into my childhood. Um, but being raised in a conservative household, it was always something I kept hidden, and it was a secret from my parents and my family. And um, even like back to some of my earliest memories, I remember being in kindergarten and I got a doll from a McDonald's Happy Meal by mistake, and it was a little Barbie doll. And I was so nervous that my parents were going to take that from me that I hid it under my bed, and I kept it hidden for I don't know how long, probably weeks or months, and would break it out and play with it when I thought it was safe to do so. And so there was a lot of signs throughout the years.
Hmm. Being that you mentioned that intersex is sort of a, I don't like using the term rare thing, but it's a little less known. When you came to this realization, when you were given this information, did you have somebody to look to or to turn to, a role model or confidant, to help you with accepting or understanding what it meant to be intersex?
So, there are some good organizations that I looked at early on. Interact and Intersex Justice Project were two that were really prevalent online. Um, but even within those organizations, I had a hard time finding people that sort of resembled, what I was going through at that time.
Hmm.
And it's one of the reasons that I did choose to sort of like really wear that as almost like a badge of honor. Because for me going through that experience, I felt like I couldn't find anybody that really like had a similar like experience to me. And so I wanted to just sort of be that light for someone else if they were going through something similar, or they experienced something similar in that way. And so um, it definitely was one of the things that motivated me to sort of, set up like a public page to share information.
Hmm. And what have you been able to accomplish through that? What sort of mentorship or effect have you been able to have?
Well, I hope a decent one. You know, I I haven't been like on a public page for as long as I wish I maybe would have.
Hmm.
The first year and a half of my transition, I really didn't have a huge social media presence because I was just kind of in survival mode. Um, I would go on like Reddit once in a while and some of the intersex forums and trans forums that are on there and, make some friends and talk to people and that sort of thing. But um, throughout the last, I would say 6 7 months of doing my sort of public facing channel, I've met a lot of really great people. I try to answer as many messages as I can of people who are like, I'm just struggling, I'm just going through some stuff, and what do you think? And it's hard, when you're balancing work and life and all that to sort of play that role sometimes. But I think it's also super important.
Hmm. Yeah, it's great that you've been able to do that and you've been able to have a direct impact on people. When you talk about your public forum, you mentioned you're speaking of Unlabeled Truth on Instagram, right?
That's the one.
So shifting gears to how you came out then. Were you married at the time when you got the information from the blood work?
I was, yeah. I've been together with my wife for almost 16 years. So we've been married for, oh, she would murder me right now if she heard me thinking in my head. 13 years.
Okay. Well,
We've been
that's
married for
wonderful.
13 years,
Hmm.
together for 16. And so we were together when I transitioned.
Hmm. Did that make it easier to come out to her? So was she along there, along your side with all of that?
Yeah, she was a great support. You know, there's certainly some bumps in the road that come from when it's like real, right? Like it's like, no, this is going to happen now. This is where we're going. And so we did a lot of therapy. We had a lot of things to work through, and um, there were times that, like, I was frustrated because I felt like I was moving too slow and I was sort of delaying aspects of my transition, but it was to let my wife and kids catch up.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times where I'm sure she probably felt like, oh, you're moving way too fast now, like, so it's just kind of that constant flow of communication and making sure that those lines are open to try to keep that healthy relationship going.
Were you able to strike a good balance between those and keep things relatively smooth through that?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, I'd be lying if I said it was smooth sailing all the time. There's definitely bumps and
Mm.
a lot of therapy that went into that in those early months, especially because I think for any spouse, it's like they want to be supportive, and they want to be there, but they're also, dealing with a lot of issues from their perspective, right? Like,
Mm.
they didn't get a choice in it. They didn't get a say in whether
Yeah.
or not you're trans, intersex, or whatever. So they really get dealt sort of a hard hand as well. And I think you kind of see a full spectrum of reactions, in the community, right? There's like the extreme where the wife's like, nope, I'm out, like
Yeah.
I'm done. And then on the other side you have women who are like, no, like I'm gonna embrace you and I'm gonna be there and I'm gonna be your rock, and I think my wife definitely leans more towards that, being supportive and hanging in there for me when it mattered the most.
Hmm. You mentioned coming from a conservative family. How did you come out to them, and what was their level of acceptance? How did that go?
I threw a letter and I ran. No, I sent an email to pretty much most of my family, parents and grandparents and people who were, still at least present in my life at the time. And I did that because I was really scared of their reaction. I wasn't in the best frame of mind at the time. I didn't think I could take, a bunch of rejection and hate thrown at me. And um, in hindsight, I wouldn't change a thing. I'd do it the same way. I would send them an email and say, this is what's happening, and I hope you can be supportive. And if not, then sorry, I guess this is where we draw the line, and
Hmm.
it was a hard experience doing that in the culture and the environment I grew up in.
Hmm. Did you have problems with that within yourself, and then with your wife as well? And I mean, the
Yeah,
religious and the kind of cultural background that you were brought up in.
absolutely. I mean, I think part of the acceptance aspect for somebody that grew up in a super conservative or religious background is you almost have to like challenge your own beliefs, like this is what I've been told for my whole life that's true, and like do I even believe that, and why would I or not believe that? And you go through this sort of like the mental theatrics of like deconstructing your own religious worldview because it's so indoctrinated uh, from childhood. I mean, I was sent to Christian schools and I was in church twice a week, and um, my parents were very strict religious people. And I was told early on, the first time I ever heard what a gay person was when I was in like junior high school. I mean, talk about a lack of information for somebody that was struggling with it on the inside. It's like,
Yeah.
it was very clear to me early on that I was, quote, going to hell if I even talked about this kind of stuff. So it was definitely a lot of shame I had to work through, and a lot of sort of deconstructing that religious background that I came from to even get to a self acceptance. And my wife also,
Mhm.
she's taken enough heat from her family and her side to last a lifetime, honestly.
Yeah. So it sounds like in the church you knew something was different about you from the church perspective. Something was wrong with you at a fairly early
Mhm.
age. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I definitely had an awareness that there was something like I didn't feel right, there
Hmm.
was something not, there like I felt off. It's like why I don't feel like I am who I am.
Yeah.
And so that was a hard thing to process, especially not having the terminology um, of what a trans person is, and what intersex is, and all these, even non-binary, right? These terms didn't exist in the 90s
Hmm.
in a conservative church environment. They just didn't exist. And I just knew whatever was wrong with me was going to get me sent to hell based on what they were telling me. So
All signs point to hell. Okay. Well, great.
all signs to hell. We're
Uh,
going.
we're going. We're just a matter of how fast.
That's right.
So what was in coming out? What was your most difficult conversation, or who was your most difficult person to approach?
So it's pretty hard. It's probably a tie between my parents and my wife's parents.
Hmm.
Um, but I would give the edge to my wife's parents, right? Because there's still this element that I want to be a good, I want to be a good spouse for my wife. I want to be a good partner in life. I want to still do some of those things that I did before. And, I work and I try to, provide as best I can, in that way. And she works too and tries to provide, we're teammates. That's what we do. And I was very nervous that, her parents and her family would actively try to, get her out of the situation, right? Like just be
Hmm.
like, forget this, like, let's go, you're out of here. And to a certain extent that happened. I mean, there was a lot of hate thrown in those early months at me specifically. And I give her a lot of credit. She held her ground and she was like, nope, you know, you keep talking like this, and I'm cutting ties with you. And, again, like when the world came crashing in, it's like you're sort of left with your people, your core circle.
Yeah. And it's amazing that she was that willing to be that rock for you there and to stick with you over everything else. That's amazing. And I know we talked in the pre-interview about the fact that you have kids, and so the ties to the grandparents is really important. You want to have that relationship for your kids.
Exactly. Yeah. You're in a tough spot when, with some of the things that were going on in those early months, it would be easy if you're on your own just to be like, okay, I'll see you later. I will maybe come back and talk to you in like 5 years. I don't need to deal with this right now. But
Yeah.
when you have kids and that's their grandparents and they're already going through so much, with what was happening with me and the transition, it's like you just don't want to keep throwing curveballs at them. So
Hmm.
you're trying to do your best just to like stabilize the situation. And it's hard.
Do you have any single piece of advice for, you mentioned communication. Was there anything else that was a major key in bringing your wife along and making it easy on her and basically holding the relationship together?
Just honesty. Um, for me, I would say that I did that well sometimes and I didn't do it well other times. I was very open with her at the beginning of our relationship that I had some struggles in this area and I didn't know why. And I was very open in that context. But the harder it got for me to keep kind of moving forward in my current life and the way I was at that time, sort of that previous version.
Yeah.
I wasn't as honest when it was getting really bad and really dark. She didn't see how bad I was self-destructing in those moments. And I chose not to share it because, you're just like, I just got to figure this out. I got to try to deal with this. And you don't want to say anything.
Yeah, you
So,
don't want to pile on to the
just,
emotion that's already there, right?
yeah, honesty through the whole process as best you can.
Mhm. So, what does transition look like for you? And I know it's just a perspective thing, but do you feel like there's anything key that's particularly different for someone who's intersex versus someone who's trans?
Well, I know from my perspective, probably one of the biggest differences is I feel like I have a lot more blood tests. So I hate needles too. So it's kind of like cruel irony. It's like, oh, get your blood drawn once a month or however many times I got to go do it. Yeah, my levels can kind of go out of whack. That's sort of a disadvantage.
Hmm.
As far as an advantage, I don't know if there's like an advantage that I could point to. I always felt like I was able to sort of adapt as best as I could in this role, and given the massive change everybody goes through when they go through something like this, and so um, some people have asked me if that's because I was intersex or whatever, and I don't know the answer to that. So
Hmm.
I would say I would say I don't have a problem with being intersex, but I wish I didn't have to get poked with needles as much.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think a lot of people would say that. So how far along are you in your process? And along the line, have your goals shifted?
Yeah, I think in the first early like third or so of my transition, it was really just surviving. I think sort of that middle time was really just like kind of becoming more comfortable with who I was, my
Mhm.
appearance, my style, sort of like learning all those things that you don't get, when you're growing up and get to go through the awkward teen years. You get to do it as an adult, which is fun. You're like, I sort of know how to put on makeup, but I sort of don't. So like learning all that stuff is a challenge.
Yeah, second
But
puberty is a
now,
joy.
yeah, yeah, it can be a real treat. But now I think it's really being like present and like trying to figure out like how I can best utilize what has happened in my life to best leverage that for my family, my community, and sort of the people around me. Um, and trying to make it like a positive. I mean, it's
Mhm.
like I'm proud of who I am, and but my transition sucked. It really did. It was terrible, and there's a lot of crap that happened that I hope people don't have to go through. And if I can turn this into some positive things that happen down the road, it'll help sort of even myself therapeutically feel like, oh, that's awesome, like that we were able to get to this point.
What have you been able to accomplish specifically because you're trans, or what are you hoping to accomplish because of that fact?
So in my current job where I am, I work for a college, and I'm in the marketing department at a college, and I serve as an officer of an advocacy group for not only the staff but all the students, and it reaches over 100,000 students. So
Wow.
it's a huge reach, and I provide a lot of perspective to that group. I'm the only person who is intersex and trans on that group. I'm actually the only trans person as well. So there's no representation from this community on that group. And I think it's
Hmm.
important because, as an 18-year-old student going to college, right? Like if there's an equality group at your school that's striving for, the
Yeah.
LGBTQ plus advocacy, it's like you want to see yourself in that. You want to see that visibility that like you're okay, like you're accepted. There's a safe space here for you. Um, and that's definitely like a kind of a unique perspective that I can bring to that group. And just given my background, sort of lend my marketing skills as best I can to them.
Hmm. What are some of the key fears you ran up against in your transition, and how have you overcome those?
So the first fear was I was going to lose everything. I was going to lose everyone,
Yeah.
my job and my family and my marriage. And some of those have come true and some of those haven't. Um, I think you start realizing really quick though what's important and who's important. And just because somebody has a title uh, or maybe a biological status as a family member, it doesn't mean that they hold power over you. And it doesn't mean that, you know, you always hear the expression like family is family, at the end of the day. But it's like sometimes for people in this community, it's really like, no, your family is like your chosen family. It's the people you know that you can count on when you need them. And that can be elements of your intermediate family. And then also like friends and confidants that you meet along the way. So
Hmm.
that's a huge important thing that I had to learn early on. That losing some people out of your family wasn't actually a bad thing. It was sort of like it ended up being a positive for me.
That's an important perspective to have, especially to be able to maintain some positivity because it's something that we all face and we all struggle with. So what do you do in your life to find validation in yourself and in your identity? What are some of the fun things that you get to do that just make you feel euphoric?
I love getting my nails done. I just got them done the other day. So that's something that I do. I try to do as much like of those little self-care things
Mhm.
as I can. I love just going to get my hair done when it's time to get my hair done. Like those are just fun, validating things that several years in haven't gotten old for me. So, so yeah, just making sure that as busy as life can get, setting aside a little bit of time to sort of do whatever it is that you're passionate about. You can relax, you can de-stress. Those types of things are super important.
These days, what causes you to stumble against dysphoria? What brings that about?
Um, well, hearing myself on video causes that sometimes. So one
Facts,
of the
yes.
things, like, yeah, when we were talking about doing this, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna face my fear, and I'm gonna do like a little podcast and do this show and try to get my voice out there, type of thing. So, um, operating like in a digital realm that I normally do, it's easy to sort of hide behind my computer and do stuff and
Hmm.
not, take the video camera out and get the face out there. Um, so that's been some dysphoria. I'm a little taller. I'm 5'10", and I've lost a lot of weight over the last 4 or 5 years. And so there's times that maybe it's reality, maybe it's not, but I think there's certain parts of my body or certain things that I'm like, that doesn't look right, or that's not like so out of proportion. And you just like cause yourself to spiral a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And, you just try to find ways to like ground yourself as best you can. And I think it just takes time. It's like early on, there's a lot more of that, I think. And then as you kind of keep going, there's a certain point where you just hit a phase and you're like, I just don't give a crap anymore what people think. Like, I'm going to do my life and screw everyone.
It's the perfect attitude to have. So, what have been some of the biggest learning curves you've had in your transition, and how, things that you've had to get used to?
One of the biggest learning curves for me early on was really learning about the entire community, not just like trans issues or intersex issues, but non-binary people and people in the lesbian and gay communities. Because I was so like brought up away from that, like I just didn't know like the history of those communities. And so it's taken me a long time to really catch up on a lot of that history. That's really important for anybody I think that's new, is to like look at people who have come before them and what they've done and those contributions, because it gives you kind of a sense of like amazement, like how did they go through what they did, because it was even worse back then. And then it just kind of helps motivate me personally. So that was a huge learning curve.
Hmm.
Hair, makeup, all the normal stuff is a huge learning curve. I'm super clumsy. I spill all the time. And learning how to put on eyeliner was like, it was like trying to learn how to do like a surgical technique for me. So the the early years of Lindsey eyeliner were not very good.
What has been the favorite thing that you've learned on your journey?
That's a hard question. My favorite thing I have learned. Just don't feel ashamed of who you are because of other people. Too often we evaluate ourselves through the lens of other people, and just because they're uncomfortable with trans people, or they don't know what the word intersex means, or they don't know what non-binary is, it's like we almost try to conform to what they want, and just be comfortable with who you are. If you want to present feminine. If you want to present masculine. It's okay to have a range of expressions within the same individual, and be proud of who you are. I mean, I just can't say it enough. It's like, for me personally, feel like I was almost like manipulated over the years with my religious upbringing to always feel ashamed of who I was. And years after undoing that with therapy, it's like now I'm like, no, don't let people do that to you.
How do you feel that transitioning has affected your mental health?
It's made it so much better. I was in a place before I transitioned that finally brought me to a place of transitioning that I was just ready to. I was ready in my life. I was depressed. I weighed 326 pounds. I was abusing food and substances and just doing a lot of self-destructive things. And
Mhm.
I was okay ending my life. At that point in time, I had given up. I was ready to give up. And I can say that that's never been a thought that's crossed my mind, in recent memory, since I've transitioned. It's like I'm comfortable now, and I have a reason to keep moving forward and to be here. So it really does. Transitioning does save lives, and you know, the groups that are out there right now that are pushing that trans narrative are really doing a lot of damage to young people. It's really sad.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot for us to fight against right now, and it's not like the fight isn't hard enough already, but I think we're strong enough,
Oh yeah, stronger than they realize.
especially now that our numbers are we're kind of coalescing our numbers in a good way.
Absolutely, yeah. The more visible we are and the more awareness we raise, the more we give people a door to walk through that feel this way and know that's who they are, but maybe just didn't feel safe enough.
Hmm.
And that's that's going to be the difference, is like those people coming out and saying, okay, like I feel safe now because of what this group did or what this group did or whatever. And those numbers rising just lead to better results for all of us as a whole.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned that metaphor of the door and helping them walk through it. It's just like, yeah, so many of us didn't even realize there was a door for a long time.
Only fire and hell.
Yeah, where all the signs were pointing, that was all you could see. So,
That's
as we
right.
wrap up this section, what advice do you have to pass on to young or closeted trans people out there?
Don't compare yourself to somebody that's transitioned for 4 or 5 years. It's a trap I got into early on in my transition, and I think we all do it. Especially as women, we compare. We look at each other and we say, "Oh, well, she looks like this, and she looks like this." And early on in my transitions, I really struggled with the comparison thing, and take it one day at a time. Don't feel like you need to rush the process. It's your process and how you're comfortable. So um, don't rush it because you think you got to get somewhere quicker. It's like you'll get there. You know, the process works. You'll get there. It might not be overnight, but you get there.
Lindsey, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. We really appreciate having you here.
Yeah, it was fun to be here and talking with you, and hope everybody watching enjoyed it.